In the year 2145, humanity finally achieved what many had dreamed of for millennia: the end of scarcity. Thanks to molecular assemblers, machines capable of creating any physical object atom by atom, there was no longer a shortage of food, water, clothing, shelter, or even luxury goods. Homes were self-cleaning, meals were instantly fabricated to gourmet perfection, and even space travel had become accessible to the average person. Diseases were cured before symptoms appeared, and aging was more a fashion choice than a biological limit. At first, the world celebrated. Global conflicts over resources evaporated overnight. The once vast economic divide between the ultra-wealthy and the poor narrowed until it nearly disappeared. Nations dissolved old political tensions, focusing instead on planetary stewardship and interstellar exploration. In this new golden age, humans were finally free. Not just free to survive, but free to dream. And yet, within a few decades, something strange began to stir. Elon Musk, though biologically 174 years old, still held a unique cultural place as one of the original architects of the post-scarcity world. His legacy lived on not just through SpaceX's Martian colonies or Neuralink's brain-computer symbiosis, but in the very infrastructure that now blanketed Earth with abundance. Musk spent his later years in what could only be described as restless dissatisfaction. Despite having unlocked unimaginable advancements, he often wandered through the corridors of his orbital habitat, gazing down at Earth, pondering whether the human condition had truly improved. Why were depression and anxiety rates higher now than a century ago? Why did the demand for virtual escapism skyrocket even as real-world hardships disappeared? Why, in a world where no one lacked anything, did people still feel so deeply unfulfilled? On the ground, daily life was a glittering display of convenience. Children designed their own toys in virtual sandboxes, which their household assemblers produced on demand. Couples vacationed on the moon or dived into simulated universes indistinguishable from reality. Artists created with infinite resources, paint that shifted color with mood, symphonies composed by AI-human collaborations, architecture that danced to the rhythm of the weather. Yet a subtle restlessness crept through society. Psychologists began noticing patterns. People obsessed over minor social slights. They hoarded artificial distinctions, like rare digital pets or exclusive simulated memories. Conflict hadn't disappeared. It had simply moved into new territories. Status was no longer about material possessions, but about exclusivity, uniqueness, the curated identity. Take, for example, Amira Jinn, a world-famous virtual influencer. Though she didn't exist in a physical body, Amira had more followers than any human ever had. Designed by an anonymous collective, she embodied perfection in every sense: looks, intellect, humor, empathy. Millions adored her, yet her creators constantly worried about her relevance. Without scarcity, people's attention became the most valuable resource, and it was always shifting. Amira's design team worked tirelessly to generate content that would capture increasingly fragmented desires. Musk watched this unfold with growing unease. Once, he had believed that eliminating scarcity would liberate humanity to explore the stars, unlock creativity, and live meaningful lives. But instead, he saw humans trapped in new feedback loops, craving novelty for novelty's sake, chasing recognition, manufacturing artificial limitations to recreate the competitive thrill they had lost. Even Mars, once the symbol of humanity's daring spirit, had become boring. Colonists lived comfortably in terraformed environments, free from the hardships that had once defined the pioneering mythos. Their challenges were now carefully calibrated simulations, games designed to simulate risk without actual danger. At a global summit on human flourishing, Musk gave what would become his last major address. Standing before a crowd of leaders, scientists, philosophers, and cultural icons, he posed a piercing question. If we have everything we ever needed, why do we feel like we have nothing? The room was silent. It was a question that had been forming quietly in private circles but rarely voiced so directly. What drives desire when scarcity disappears? Is it embedded in human biology? Is it purely a cultural construct? Are we wired to want simply because wanting is the engine of life? Musk's challenge was not just philosophical. It was becoming a public issue. Rates of ennui, a clinical form of profound existential boredom, were rising, particularly among younger generations who had never known scarcity. Virtual reality companies flourished, offering elaborate, sometimes dangerous experiences just to pierce through the fog of emotional numbness. On the surface, humanity had triumphed. But underneath, cracks were forming. And as Musk himself retreated into reclusive contemplation, others were beginning to pick up the threads of his question, eager to understand what lay at the heart of human longing. One of those was Dr. Lena Ortiz, a cognitive scientist whose work had quietly attracted international attention. She believed that Musk's question was not only vital, it was urgent. For if humanity could not understand its own desires, even abundance might become a kind of slow, invisible collapse. As Ortiz prepared for an unprecedented experiment, one that would test the very nature of human motivation, the world watched with a mixture of curiosity and dread. Could there be meaning without struggle? Could there be desire without lack? The next phase of humanity's story was about to begin. Dr. Lena Ortiz had always been fascinated by what drove the human mind. Before the post-scarcity era, her research had focused on resilience, how people overcame trauma, deprivation, and failure. But in this new world, her focus had shifted. Without struggle, what was left to overcome? What did resilience even mean when life's sharp edges had been smoothed away? Ortiz worked from a research hub in the Swiss Alps, a breathtaking facility designed like a crystalline lattice embedded into the mountainside. Outside, the snow sparkled under automated climate regulation, engineered to maintain ideal skiing conditions year-round. Not that many people bothered to ski anymore. Why brave the cold when you could experience the perfect simulated slope from your living room? Her most recent project was known as Project Athena. It involved a hand-picked group of participants who volunteered to have their desires tracked, analyzed, and even artificially manipulated. The goal? To understand how people generated longing in the absence of need. One of her star subjects was Theo Zhang, a world-famous musician and artist who had emerged as the most followed human on the network. Not for his wealth, irrelevant, or looks, perfectly modifiable, but for his daring experiments with selfhood. Theo regularly reinvented his appearance, personality, and even memory, using advanced neural editing to craft new versions of himself. One month, he would live as a blind composer, another as an AI-merged painter with no physical form. Theo had once been an idealist. He'd believed post-scarcity would unlock the full creative potential of humanity. But increasingly, he found himself restless. No matter how elaborate his identity experiments became, they began to feel hollow. Each reinvention demanded greater spectacle, greater extremity, to maintain the spark of excitement. He wasn't alone. Across the globe, people were pushing into artificial experiences, manufacturing stakes where none existed. Ortiz's data painted a grim picture. Even with limitless freedom, humans were not flourishing. They were searching endlessly for something just beyond their reach. Attention was the currency. Novelty was the addiction. In the absence of real need, humans invented artificial scarcity, rare experiences, limited access, customized versions of reality, just to recreate the feeling of wanting. In one of her experiments, Ortiz introduced artificial constraints into a simulated environment. She placed participants into a perfectly controlled virtual world, but limited their access to certain areas, items, or interactions. The result was immediate. People became obsessed with what was off-limits. They formed alliances, devised strategies, and even experienced bursts of excitement when they unlocked hidden zones. Scarcity, even fabricated, sparked desire. Theo, too, found himself pulled into this experiment. Despite knowing it was constructed, he couldn't help but feel his heart race as he chased rare in-game experiences, competed for limited badges, or sought out unique interactions. He laughed bitterly at his own reaction. "We're animals," he murmured to Ortiz during one of their debriefings. "No matter how smart we get, we're still wired to want what we can't have." Ortiz nodded thoughtfully, but she wasn't content with just observing. She wanted to know why. In private sessions, she probed deeper. Was desire purely evolutionary, tied to survival, or was there something more, something existential? Was the human mind, at its core, designed to reach for the impossible? Not just as a survival mechanism, but as a fundamental expression of being? Around this time, a quiet crisis began brewing in the virtual influencer world. Amira Jinn, the synthetic celebrity, was losing followers. For years, her creators had stayed ahead by constantly upgrading her, reinventing her persona, and introducing rare versions of her interactions, limited-time events, exclusive conversations. But now, even her most loyal fans were drifting away. Engagement was plummeting. Why? Because no matter how perfect Amira became, she lacked one thing: real vulnerability, real limitation. Her perfection made her predictable. People began craving something raw, something uncertain. They sought influencers and personalities who were flawed, unpredictable, even chaotic. Some of the most viral figures were now anonymous creators who glitched the system, offering unscripted moments of conflict, failure, or rebellion. Ortiz noticed this shift with fascination. It wasn't scarcity of things people wanted. It was scarcity of authenticity. Without risk, without limitation, experiences became flat. And without flatness, desire withered. Meanwhile, Musk, now living in near-total seclusion, followed Ortiz's work with interest. He saw in her experiments the same pattern he had wrestled with for years: that humans weren't designed just to exist comfortably. They were designed to stretch, to strain, to reach. Even in a world where every external need was met, the internal hunger remained. As Ortiz prepared the next phase of Project Athena, she reached out to Theo for something radical. She proposed an experiment that terrified even him: the complete erasure of choice. For 1 month, Theo would surrender all control over his life. He wouldn't choose what to eat, where to go, who to interact with, or even what to think about. Everything would be determined for him by the experiment's algorithms. Theo hesitated. "Why would anyone want to live like that?" he asked. Ortiz smiled softly. "Because only then will we know if desire can exist without freedom." The implications were enormous. If humans still experienced longing, even when stripped of agency, it would suggest that desire wasn't just about scarcity. It was about something deeper, embedded in consciousness itself. But if desire collapsed without freedom, it would confirm that the human engine was built on the dance between lack and choice. Theo agreed, reluctantly. As the final preparations were made, Ortiz felt a surge of anticipation. They were on the verge of uncovering something profound, not just about human desire, but about what it meant to be human at all. And as the world watched, curious and hungry for answers, one question echoed louder than ever. In a universe without limits, was the greatest limit ourselves? Theo's month under Project Athena began on a crisp morning. He awoke to an unfamiliar room, not the studio apartment he usually reset between identity phases, but a featureless living space designed by Ortiz's team. No choices, no customization, no art on the walls, no clothes to select. The AI determined his meals, his schedule, his conversations. Every detail of his life was orchestrated. At first, Theo found it amusing. He joked with Ortiz's assistants, made snarky comments during his daily debriefs, and even entertained himself by trying to guess what would come next. But within days, a creeping frustration set in. He realized how much of his sense of self had been tied to the smallest acts of choice: what to wear, what to eat, which song to listen to while brushing his teeth. Without these micro-decisions, his inner life grew dull. He began feeling blank, not free, not content, just weightless, floating without direction. Meanwhile, Ortiz observed closely. Every biometric marker, every neural pattern, every subtle shift in Theo's mood was monitored. At first, his brain showed signs of mild stimulation, similar to what people experienced on novelty vacations or during meditation. But by week 2, the patterns darkened. His dopamine pathways flatlined. His emotional centers dulled. Even when the AI fed him pleasurable stimuli, gourmet meals, beautiful visual scenes, uplifting conversations, Theo's brain barely reacted. Desire was draining away. But then, something remarkable happened. By week 3, Theo's brain activity shifted. Unexpectedly, his creative centers sparked back to life, not in response to external stimuli, but internally. He began daydreaming, fantasizing. He started inventing little stories, crafting imaginary choices in his head, constructing mental universes where he could shape outcomes. His desire hadn't disappeared. It had migrated inward. Ortiz was astonished. This wasn't just about scarcity or freedom. It was about the mind's inherent drive to generate possibilities. Even when stripped of external options, Theo's brain invented new arenas to play in. His mind rebelled against constraint by creating its own playgrounds. This insight reshaped Ortiz's entire framework. Desire wasn't merely a reaction to lack. It was an active, creative force. The human brain was, at its core, a machine for imagining alternatives. Scarcity might sharpen that impulse, but it wasn't the source. The source was something deeper, an existential hunger to reach beyond what is. As the experiment concluded, Theo emerged transformed. He no longer felt the need to endlessly reinvent himself through external modifications. Instead, he turned inward, focusing on the landscapes of his own imagination. His art shifted dramatically, from spectacle-driven performance to introspective, meditative works exploring consciousness, perception, and the nature of longing itself. Across the world, Ortiz's findings rippled through scientific and cultural circles. Debates flared. Was desire a flaw or a feature? Should society continue chasing artificial scarcity to keep people engaged? Or should it cultivate the inner landscapes of creativity and meaning? Even Amira Jin's design team took note. They pivoted her persona away from polished perfection, introducing glitches, unpredictability, moments of vulnerability. Suddenly, Amira became fascinating again, not because she was flawless, but because she hinted at something raw and unfinished. And what of Musk? From his high-orbit retreat, he watched it all unfold, his earlier despair softening into a quiet, bittersweet satisfaction. He had once believed that abundance would free humanity, and in a sense, it had, but not by eliminating desire. Rather, it had revealed desire's true nature, not a thirst for things, but a hunger for possibility. As Ortiz's research entered its next phase, she proposed a radical new idea, teaching people not to escape boredom with ever more elaborate distractions, but to embrace it as a gateway to deeper creativity. Schools, workplaces, even entertainment industries began experimenting with generative silence, spaces where people were intentionally left without stimulation, forced to turn inward and explore the wilderness of their own minds. For the first time in centuries, Humanity's most valuable frontier was no longer outer space, virtual space, or material innovation. It was the uncharted expanse within. In the end, the question Musk had once posed, "If we have everything, why do we feel like we have nothing?" found its answer. Because having everything was never the point. The point was becoming, not accumulating, but transforming, not grasping, but reaching, not settling into satisfaction, but dancing always with the next horizon, the next idea, the next version of what could be. Even when there is no scarcity, human desire endures, not as a desperate scramble for survival, but as a radiant expression of imagination, of longing, of life itself. In a future where scarcity has been eradicated, humanity faces an unexpected challenge, a crisis of meaning. Part 1 introduces us to this utopian world of abundance, where figures like Elon Musk reflect on the puzzling rise of dissatisfaction, despite the disappearance of material need. We see cracks forming in society as people shift their desires away from things and toward artificial markers of uniqueness, status, and novelty. In Part 2, we dive deeper into the psychology of post-scarcity life through the lens of Dr. Lena Ortiz and Theo Zhang, a world-renowned artist constantly reinventing himself. Ortiz's experiments show that even when people have everything, they fabricate new forms of scarcity to keep desire alive, whether it's exclusive experiences, rare digital moments, or social games. As virtual influencers like Amira Jin begin to lose relevance, society starts grappling with a new realization. Perfection and abundance do not satisfy the fundamental human hunger for meaning and possibility. Part 3 brings a breakthrough. When Theo undergoes a radical experiment, giving up all personal choice, he first slips into apathy, but then rekindles his drive by turning inward, using imagination as his new arena for desire. Ortiz's research reveals that human longing isn't tied solely to external lack. It's woven into consciousness itself. Desire is the mind's creative force, forever generating new possibilities to explore. By the story's end, humanity begins shifting from an obsession with artificial scarcity toward nurturing inner worlds, discovering that in the absence of need, it is imagination that truly drives human purpose. Ultimately, the story argues that even in a perfect world, the human journey is not about acquiring, but about transforming, reaching not for what we lack, but for what we can become.